Hello there and welcome to this week's edition of Times Exclusive right here on Times TV with me, Wezi Kasambala. Of course, a program brought to you by Rainbow Paints.
Weather Shield, another brand from Rainbow Paints. This is Ultimate. An extreme high-performance acrylic smooth textured finishing with ultraviolet absorption and maximum flexibility properties for wall finishes. A built-in fungicide to resist molds. Simple to use, quick drying, water-resistant binding power, low dirt retention, and hides hairline cracks. Suitable for use on all exterior walls, be it plaster, concrete, or brickwork. Available in a wide range of colors in 5 and 20-liter containers. Contact us today in Blantyre 01841-813, 01841-871, Lilongwe 01755-901. Email info@rainbowpaints.biz. Rainbow Paints. Peace of mind, part of the deal.
Today, I'm joined in the studios by Director of Consumer Welfare and Education at the Competition for Fair Trading Commission, or CFTC as others may know it, Lewis Kulisewa. Now, there's been a couple of issues, as you can imagine, a number of consumer issues that have arisen over the last few months in different ways. So we thought we'd bring Mr. Kulisewa into our studios to perhaps answer how they're dealing with some of these issues, but also where your remit begins and where it ends. Thank you so much for joining us, Mr. Kulisewa. It's a pleasure to have you in our studios. Let's start with World Competitions Day. You recently led the nation in commemorating World Competitions Day. Let me ask you this first of all. What does this stand for? And why is this so significant to have such a day set aside? Let's start there.
Thank you very much, Wezi, and thank you for this opportunity to be in the studio and talk about the work that we do. You are right that on the 5th of December, the Competition and Fair Trading Commission led Malawian consumers and enterprises to commemorate World Competition Day. Now, World Competition Day is a day that was deliberately set aside to rally support and create awareness about the role that an effective, competitive and fair trading regime plays in advancing the cause for consumer welfare.
Okay.
This year, of course, we had a theme that was particularly selected.
Okay.
The theme was fighting bid rigging in public procurement and how we can use that to grow the economy.
And that's a pretty big deal when we think about the Malawian context, isn't it? In terms of Malawi's business landscape and the economy. I mean, we just covered a story in our business section earlier this week where we discovered that investors are actually saying one of the main reasons why they feel reluctant to actually come into Malawi and invest, one of the main reasons was the fact that there's corruption. So bid rigging is a form of corruption, isn't it? So this is a very big deal, isn't it?
It is a very big deal. We have done our own studies. The studies that we have done show, for example, that 40% of the national budget here in Malawi is spent...
I think just for the benefit of our viewers, if you can just speak a little bit louder, Mr. Kulisewa. My voice is very, very loud, so we don't want you to be overshadowed for the benefit of our viewers at home. Go ahead.
All right, so I was saying we have done some studies in the sector, and I think one of the findings is that 40% of our national budget is spent on procurement of goods and services that are used in the delivery of public services to consumers. We have also found that if the public procurement processes were efficient, they would have helped government save huge sums of money. But of course, currently, huge sums of money are being lost due to inefficient procurement systems. And this is why we think this is indeed a very big deal.
Are you being politically correct, Mr. Kulisewa? You're calling them inefficient procurement systems. Is that another way of saying just basically corruption?
No, you have invited the Competition and Fair Trading Commission to this program, and so the messages that we'll be talking about related to the act that the Competition and Fair Trading Commission enforces.
Okay.
What
so
we
does that
talk
not transcend corruption?
What do we talk about in the enforcement of the Competition and Fair Trading Act is bid rigging and is inefficient systems that lead to leakages.
But my point is, bid rigging is a form of corruption. There's no two ways about it.
And that is not in dispute. That is not in dispute, and that's the reason why we are saying it is a problem, because that is the most important point.
Yeah.
It is a problem that must be addressed. We need to help the government save revenues. Actually, further studies done by the OECD have shown that if you deal decisively with bid rigging, commodity prices could go down to as much as 20%.
Yeah.
Now, that would be a huge benefit if we achieved it, and that's the reason why at the Commission we are committed to ensure that we empower Malawians, that at whatever level that they are involved in public procurement, they have the requisite skills to detect and report suspected cases of bid rigging. The Commission stands ready to deal decisively with these matters.
Okay, so you're confident that if indeed you are faced with these situations, you will take them head on?
The Commission, as you know, is a law enforcement agency created by an Act of Parliament, the Competition and Fair Trading Act of 1998. In that Act, the Commission has a mandate to regulate, monitor, control, and prevent any acts or behaviors on the market that are likely to adversely affect competition and fair trading.
And skew the market.
In as far as we're concerned, bid rigging is one such act that would adversely affect the state of competition and the state of consumer protection. So yes, to answer your question, yes, we stand ready to deal decisively with the matters, and we have put in place strong mechanisms for dealing with these matters.
All right, I'm glad you've said that, because I think for a lot of people this is something very serious, because when we look at the Malawian context, given Malawi's development status and its economic status, I think there's a lot at stake, isn't it, if indeed we do leave things like this, like bid rigging, to go unchecked. All the more reason why I suppose you should be at the forefront, really pushing to get this matter addressed.
There is, and of course it must be noted that there are two aspects to this. One aspect is that people must be aware that these are things that are happening, and so we must all join hands to see how we will deal with them.
Okay.
The second arm is where you're actually enforcing the law. Now, from the enforcement perspective, maybe that's where the challenges begin, because bid rigging, as it were, is a cartel conduct, is a collusive practice where maybe people collude in the dark when you don't see them. They want to cheat the economy. So one of the key challenges that we face in enforcing cartel conduct is evidence.
Okay.
How do we collect evidence to prove that 2 or 3 enterprises have colluded or have engaged in bid rigging? This is where the information is important, because we rely on everyone's participation.
Well, I'm glad you've said that, because we as the media are very active participants on matters like these. And we as the media have evidence to suggest that there are some cases, in fact there's a current case, in relation to the Eskom fiasco, the crisis that we're experiencing at the moment. I have evidence to suggest that one of the suppliers of these diesel generators that have caused a lot of controversy to come into the country, one of the suppliers, a company called Agreco, was actually pulled out because it was found that the way they were handed this particular contract was perhaps untoward. And I actually have evidence to that effect, by the way. Now, but it seems suddenly they're back.
If you have evidence, and you don't pass that evidence to relevant institutions like the commission, then of course you are not helping the
Wait
country.
a minute, Mr. Kulisewa.
So
the point I'm trying to get at, let me finish.
You need to help your country.
Let me finish.
Yes.
Before you interject, let me finish.
Yes.
What I'm trying to say is, so we have evidence to suggest that Agreco was perhaps unfairly advantaged in terms of how they were given this contract to supply these diesel generators to the Malawi government, because it's believed that they had information about other bidders, which obviously meant they were then able to undercut the other bidders, which is collusion. The collusion that you were speaking so detailed, in such a detailed fashion about. Now, my question is, assuming you were aware of this, what would you do about it?
Evidence must be provided.
Are you suggesting you don't know about this? This
I am
particular
suggesting
case?
we haven't seen evidence. No one has brought evidence, so I am actually putting
So you would want us to give you the evidence?
I am putting it to you that if there is, this is our message to your viewers,
yes,
and everyone. If there is evidence of suspected bid rigging or any other violation of the Competition and Fair Trading Act, we encourage the public to bring that evidence to the Commission. Now it becomes
is that not us doing your job? Should you not be investigating?
Well, but you see, that's where the principles of the rule of law comes in.
How so?
Not every allegation that is made
is fact.
Is fact.
Okay.
So the fact that there is the allegation you have made for us doesn't mean that there's evidence. So unless there is evidence. Let me then probably, because that's the direction the discussion is going, let me say this. The processes of registering complaints and processing complaints at the Commission as a case handling institution are pretty methodical. We receive complaints. Once a complaint is received, we do a desk review to determine whether A, there is merit to warrant suspicion, and B, whether if the facts are correct, they would amount to a violation under the Competition and Fair Trading Act. If in our assessment there is merit, and B, if the facts are true, they would amount to a violation, then we pursue the matter. So we formally launch investigations.
Okay.
Now, on the case that you are citing,
yes,
we have not received any evidence, and so I wouldn't say that there is an assessment that
we
have done to form an opinion.
I'm glad you've said that. So let me put this to you then, Mr. Kulisewa. Are you suggesting that you've not had any kind of inkling? You said that the process is somebody must report or complain, yes? Are you suggesting that no entity or nobody has come to you with and said, look, there's a South African-based company called Agreco who we believe was unfairly advantaged in the awarding of a contract to supply diesel generators to the Malawi government? Are you suggesting that you don't know that? Because if it's a question of complaining, someone may have complained. Now it's your job to investigate their claims, is it not?
If there's a complaint,
yes,
you're right. Yes,
you said there was no evidence, meaning you have the complaint, but you don't have evidence.
Well, look, again, because that's how this discussion is proceeding.
It's not the only thing we're going to discuss, but this is the critical one.
No, I agree, but you see there is more background information I need to provide you,
yes,
so that you understand from where we're coming from. In terms of the law, remember, we enforce the law, the Competition and Fair Trading Act.
Yes.
In terms of the law, how it is framed, the Commission can process cases sourced from multiple sources. Source number one is where you have someone lodging a complaint.
Okay. We've already established that.
No. Yes. So you need to get it on point. Source number two is where you come across information where there is abundant evidence that there is a violation.
Okay.
If there is that evidence in your possession, then of course that warrants an investigation. I am putting it to you in response to the question that we have not received a complaint and we have not found evidence.
Mr. Kulisewa, you're slightly changing the goalpost there, because you're shifting the goalpost, because now what you're saying is you want the evidence to be in your hands. That's effectively what you're saying. So, for example, as the media, if I'm telling you as a journalist, I'm saying we have evidence to suggest that indeed there was actually an investigation that was carried out that did prove that Aggreko was unfairly advantaged, and they pulled them out. Suspiciously, they found their way back again, and they're still going to supply these generators.
If
That implies that there's been a lot of skullduggery at play.
Your commission, our commission, is pretty methodical. I've made that very point.
Yes.
According to our processes, you can only launch an investigation where you have received evidence. And after assessing that evidence, you believe that if the story you have been told is true, it would amount to a violation of the act. That's when you launch investigation. And I'm putting it to you. I don't think I'm changing any goalposts. I'm putting it to you. We have not received that. If you have the evidence, as a very good citizen of the country,
which we are,
we encourage you to bring
we are
that
the
evidence.
watchdog.
We encourage you to
business.
bring that evidence to the commission.
So you want us to bring the evidence to you?
If you have the evidence and you are sitting
But you
on
still
it,
didn't answer the question.
If you
Initially,
have
I asked
evidence-
you whether you have heard or caught wind of this particular development. You haven't answered that.
Well, we have read the reports in the media. We haven't seen evidence. I mean, we read rows of stories every week. So, where you have evidence, you pursue an investigation. We have seen the reports. We have not seen the evidence. If you have the evidence, I repeat,
Okay,
bring
fair
it
enough.
to the commission.
Fair enough, Mr. Kulisewa. But I want to conclude this particular issue. But what I would like to end on is the fact that given the gravity of the implications of this ESCOM, the power crisis that we're experiencing, this particular issue is very, very important, isn't it? How the diesel generators are being procured, who is benefiting, and the implications it's going to have on Malawi. Malawi is literally being crippled by the power crisis. Now, if indeed it comes out later on that there was time to perhaps nip some kind of corruption in the bud by certain institutions, including the CFTC, would you not feel terrible that at a time when Malawi is already struggling economically, there may be underhand tactics that are at play, and you didn't do anything because you wanted us to give you the evidence?
It is important that we don't mix up the issues. The issues you are talking about and the argument you are advancing, you're talking about corruption.
Yes.
Corruption.
Bid rigging is corruption.
Absolutely. So, absolutely. This is where I'm getting to. It is important that we must get the basics right. I have stated when we have received a story or a complaint, we assess whether if the story is true, whether it would amount to a violation of the act. If it would not amount to a violation of the act, we then decide how we deal with it. We look at whether there would be another agency that is better placed.
Okay.
I mean, if in
All
your
right.
assessment, if you are in your assessment, the issue you're talking about is corruption. I mean, you do know that we.
But it is corruption.
We have
Whichever way you slice it,
we
Mr.
have a very
Kulisewa,
capable.
it is corruption.
We have a very capable anti-corruption bureau, to which, if the matter you are suggesting is corruption, you know where it must go.
So at what point do the lines become blurred between what the CFTC should be handling and what the ACB were privy to the bidders? That was collusion because somebody was going to get kickbacks by giving them that information. That's collusion, so that falls at your doorstep, presumably, because it's unfair competition, yes?
There are matters that we define as matters of concurrent jurisdiction. You
Okay,
see,
I like that term.
I'll tell you this. The Commission has the mandate to enforce or to promote competition and consumer protection in the market. In discharging our mandate, we also notice that there are other regulatory bodies or statutory bodies on the market whose mandate is similar or in certain ways concurrent. What the Commission has done is to enter into MOUs, cooperation agreements, with those regulators where there is a possible concurrency in terms of jurisdiction. I
Okay.
can confirm to you that the Commission has an MOU with the Anti-Corruption Bureau.
Okay.
The Commission has an MOU with MERA, MACRA, Malawi Bureau of Standards, National Lotteries Board. All these are aimed at providing a platform in which we can deal decisively with matters of concurrent jurisdiction.
All right.
In that particular industry. So yes, if there was evidence, we would work with the Anti-Corruption Bureau within the framework of the agreement we have. At the moment,
Okay.
we have not seen that evidence.
All right. Let's leave that one, Lewis. Let's move on.
Okay.
Moving on to, but still, I guess these issues still tie into each other. Let's look at the independence of the CFTC. To what extent are you truly independent, in your view?
Independence in what sense?
Independent from political interference.
The Commission was established by an Act of Parliament. I keep repeating because that's a fact. Under the Act, the Commission has specific powers.
Yes.
Powers to investigate cases of unfair trading practices, powers to investigate, and powers to make orders. If anyone was going to raise a question about the independence of the Commission, I put it to them. I would put it to them that they probably look at the extent to which the Commission objectively and robustly enforces the Act. And I think this is our verdict.
That's right. I couldn't have put it better myself. Mr. Kulisewa, sorry to interrupt you. We're going to take a short break. Hold that thought.
Okay.
We'll take a short break, but we'll come back and look more at the independence of the CFTC.
Okay.
If you're just joining us, you're watching Times Exclusive right here on Times TV with me, Wezi Kasambala. Remember, this is a program brought to you by Rainbow Paints. I'm today talking to CFTC's Lewis Kulisewa, and we're talking about a couple of issues, including bid rigging, which was incidentally the theme of this year's World commemorations for World Competitions Day. But we're now talking about other issues, and we'll be right back after this.
Weather Shield, another brand from Rainbow Paints. This is Ultimate. An extreme high-performance acrylic smooth textured finishing with ultraviolet absorption and maximum flexibility properties for wall finishes. A built-in fungicide to resist molds. Simple to use, quick drying, water-resistant binding power, low dirt retention, and hides hairline cracks. Suitable for use on all exterior walls, be it plaster, concrete, or brickwork. Available in a wide range of colors in 5 and 20-liter containers. Contact us today in Blantyre 01841-813, 01841-871, Lilongwe 01755-901. Email info@rainbowpaints.biz. Rainbow Paints. Peace of mind, part of the deal.
Welcome back. You're watching this week's edition of Times Exclusive on Times TV, brought to you by Rainbow Paints with me, Wezi Kasambala. Today, I'm joined by Director of Consumer Welfare and Education, Lewis Kulisewa, and we're talking about a couple of issues that the CFTC deals with. Just before we went to break, we were talking about bid rigging when it comes to public procurement, and that's because recently CFTC led Malawi in commemorating World Competitions Day. We spoke about a couple of points which I thought were pertinent in relation to bid rigging, which of course you've rebuffed quite fiercely when I put to you the issue of the procurement of diesel generators, etc., etc. But moving on now, we were talking about the independence of the CFTC because that has come into question. Let's maybe ask this question a different way. Where do you get your funding from as the CFTC?
Well, the Commission is fully funded by the government.
Okay.
Of course, apart from receiving government subvention, we also receive fees from the mergers and acquisitions that we assess from time to time, either those notified to us locally or mergers notified to the Commerce and Competition Commission regionally.
Okay, so do you think that perhaps this is why your independence comes into question because you're getting pretty much all your funding from government. It's difficult for you to be objective? There
is no question about the independence of the commission. It's the first time I'm hearing it, that anyone is questioning the independence of the commission. Before we took a break, I was actually making the point. If you were going to assess the independence of the commission, you will have to go through its decision-making processes.
Yes.
And see whether any of the decisions that the commission has made over the past 5 years has been compromised.
Yeah.
You will not find any decision that has been compromised. The decision-making processes at the commission are evidence-based, and we challenge anyone that every decision that we make, the law provides that it is appealable in the High Court.
Yeah.
There have been parties that are aggrieved by decisions that we have taken. They have taken the commission to court, and they have ended up being rebuffed by the courts. Now, what that is showing you is that in terms of the systems and the procedures that the commission has put in place and is following are clear, watertight, robust, and of course are only influenced by one and only factor.
And what's that?
Evidence.
Evidence. So you can state there with a clear conscience that you have no political interference and you're completely independent, irrespective of the fact that it's government that funds you.
The only interference we get is from evidence. If the evidence available suggests that there is no merit, we dismiss a matter. If the evidence available suggests otherwise, we take what the law provides, but no outside interference. Let me also make this. In terms of the structure of the commission, we have a 10-member board of commissioners comprising of eminent Malawian professionals drawn from different sectors. We have 2 representatives of the business community, 2 representatives of consumer interests. We have an accountant, we have a lawyer. These are eminent Malawians who, whenever matters are presented before them, nothing takes precedent other than evidence.
All right. Now, speaking of the decisions you make, you said that obviously the decisions you make are backed by fact, by evidence, and certainly aren't influenced by any kind of political interference. Speaking of evidence, let's move on to another issue, which again falls into your lap. The regulation of mergers on the domestic market. We've had a couple of very high-profile mergers in Malawi. Most recently, the merging of FDH Bank and MSB, and then quickly after that was National Bank and Inde Bank. I wonder, given how these mergers, in most cases, always tend to result in huge job losses. I mean, in the FDH and MSB merger, for example, at least 200 jobs were lost. National Bank and Inde Bank, I think they never really disclosed how many jobs were lost, but we know there were quite a few, and people are still losing their jobs. Given those facts, why is it that the CFTC has never necessarily turned down a merger? What are your merits? What is your criteria for approving mergers when they have such serious implications?
Well, that's a pretty loaded question. I think what must be appreciated are that obviously mergers are good to any economy.
Are they? You might want to expand on that. What do you mean by that? How are they good?
Well, a number of reasons. I would cite probably 1 or 2. I think mergers, in our current case, for example, the cases you have cited,
yes,
they involved some firms that were failing firms, firms that were, on the path to closure, that were underperforming. And so, if those banks were underperforming, if there was no buyer, of course, you know what the next course of action would have been. Probably they would have closed shop. So one of the advantages or one of the benefits that mergers do give is that in certain occasions, as in the case you have cited, you are able to revive or resuscitate underperforming units.
Regardless of whether it means people may lose their jobs.
Well, and probably this would be the next line of argument. I think any major, wherever it happens in Malawi or elsewhere, would have advantages and disadvantages on the economy. Any major, wherever, you would never find a major that has 100% benefits to the economy and 0% whatever. There will be advantages and disadvantages. What the law states, in our case, what the Competition and Fair Trading Act states, is that whenever you are assessing a major, you must do two things broadly.
Okay.
Number one, what are the advantages of that major? Number two, what are the disadvantages? Number three, most importantly, you must weigh the advantages
versus the disadvantages.
If the advantages outweigh the disadvantages, you approve.
Okay.
That's what the law says. So whenever we are presented with an application for a major authorization, that is the process that we go through. So we do a lot of economic analysis, basically to inform us the impact on, for example, you mentioned jobs.
Yes.
Because
that's what most people care about, their jobs at the end of the day.
For us, of course, jobs is one of the criteria, because ultimately we have to look at the bigger picture and determine what the advantages and the disadvantages are and weigh.
Okay.
For the measures that you have stated, and of course others that you said we authorized, yes, we did authorize, because the advantages outweighed the disadvantages.
So what happens in a case where, for example, with the FDH and MSB merger, I remember when the issue initially broke, FDH Bank's managing director, Tom Bingajo, initially said there'd be no job losses. And then later on, obviously, there were job losses. Does the CFTC sort of regulate that kind of action as well, where a company has said one thing and then it backtracks?
When we are making a major assessment, there is a laid down process that is followed. We obviously want the merging parties to submit certain documentation to us. It is prescribed. Then we also consult the market. We write players, different players in that market. In the banking industry, for example, we would have written all the banks and all the critical players in that industry to give us an opinion about their take on the pending merger.
Okay.
We use all the data collected through that consultations to make the assessment. That is the process. Now, certain things outside that are not within our statutory.
Outside your jurisdiction.
Yes.
Okay. Speaking of jurisdiction, however, the law does, however, mandate you to oversee consumer protection. Am I right?
It does.
Okay. I'm glad that we've both agreed on that one, at the very least, Lewis, because there have been a couple of issues that have arisen in the last few months. One such incident was the Lilongwe water contamination saga. You remember what happened, where sewage ended up in people's homes. That's one example. The other one is supermarkets withholding change. That's another story that we've also covered. These kind of matters. The secret hiking of water tariffs by water boards. What are you doing to address these kind of issues as a CFTC? Because it seems like there's a lot of duplicity going on the part of the people who are providing a service, like, for example, supermarkets. And even the boards, I mean, secretly hiking water?
Of course, I will probably not want to be discussing case by case, but you want me, obviously, to be discussing it.
I do.
Which is.
I've given you all those examples just to give you evidence that there's a number of things that fall within your jurisdiction, and I'd be interested to know how you deal with them.
Yes, what you have not given us are the over 500 cases that we have concluded in favor of consumers.
No, don't worry, Mr. Kulisewa.
Yes,
I'm fully aware of the strides you've made, including, for example, the regulation of minibuses and their tariffs.
Yes.
I know about those strides.
All right.
But let's look at the issues that are bothering Malawians today.
That's fine. So we will look at that. I think we would want to have a much broader picture. The issue around the
water contamination.
Water contamination in Area 18. You ask whether we are aware of it.
No, I didn't ask that. What I asked was, what are you doing about it?
We are aware that there were issues around water contamination in Area 18. We are also aware that the Malawi Bureau of Standards and the Ministry of Industry and Trade were involved at some point. We have information that the parties have gone to court. And yeah, so if you ask us what we're doing about
okay, so it's in court at the moment.
It is in court, and well, I mean, as much as we would want to have a say,
yeah,
you know, that
the matter is in court.
Yes.
Okay.
The second issue you raised
was supermarkets withholding change. That was pretty naughty, wasn't it?
It was naughty,
and even in some cases, stamping things on receipts that were not there.
Yes. Well, we are investigating about 4 or 5 companies at the moment for that conduct. I am glad you have raised that matter, because I think we obviously this is a matter that the Daily Times, I think, broke sometime earlier this year, and then of course having got the news in the papers, the commission was given evidence by some of the people that spoke to the Daily Times.
Are you implying that you wait to see things in the paper before you act?
The commission processed the evidence and found it persuasive and proceeded to commence investigation. So the reason
only after you saw it in the paper. Is that what you're suggesting?
No. If you want to liken this to something else, then you can liken it to the earlier discussion we had. I am putting it to you that the story around the change was broken by the Daily Times.
Yes.
It took a few weeks or months before we got evidence. When we had evidence, we started pursuing not one company, 5 companies. That investigation is at an advanced stage. Come January, the board of the Competition and Fair Trading Commission will sit and take a decision. So all I'm saying, our processes are methodical. We need to get evidence, and once we have got evidence, we process it. It's a legal process that must be fulfilled.
Okay.
The third one, you talk about the
water tariff hikes, secretive hikes.
Yes. So again, we received information end October that the Blantyre Water Board in particular had raised water tariffs.
Yes.
In some cases up to 100%. We asked for evidence from the complainant, which he provided. And because we got sufficient evidence, I can confirm to you that on 8th November, we launched investigation. We launched an investigation against Blantyre Water Board.
Okay.
That investigation is ongoing. It is at an advanced stage at the moment. Come January, the commission again will probably sit and look at the report that has been issued and take appropriate orders.
Okay, I'm glad you said that, because some quarters feel that perhaps the process is a bit delayed, and there's been delays to finding remedies to the solution, because some people have already had, obviously, their tariffs hiked. So then what? While you investigate, what are the immediate remedies for the consumer?
Well, for us, we are a law enforcement agency. We have to follow the due process. The due process requires that where you have an allegation that is merited, you must issue a notice. Once you have issued the notice, you must allow the party some days to look at the allegations and respond. And then whatever response you get, you analyze the information and report to the board for a decision. That process, according to our service charter, takes about 90 days, not more than 90 days. The 90 days is the spacing between board meetings. Our board meets every quarter to consider and decide cases. So for this investigation, we commenced it after the board had already met for the October session, and I am putting it to you we are making an undertaking that it will be presented to the next board meeting in January.
All right. Now, the most recent and probably the biggest issue right now for consumers is energy. The power crisis that we are experiencing. Like I said to you earlier, the country has effectively been crippled. It's on its knees as a result of this power crisis. There's been stories of things like medical supplies, vaccines, potentially going to be lost because we have no power. Businesses, small and medium enterprises are suffering because they cannot function due to the constant power crisis and outages that we are experiencing. Now I wonder, given that your mandate by the act that brought you into existence gives you power to overlook and oversee consumer protection, what is it that you are doing about the fact that the only reason Malawians are in this particular position is because we have a monopoly? And the monopoly is that we have a power distributor and a power supplier, okay, or producer. That is a monopoly. It's obvious. Eskom and Ejenko are monopolies. What are you doing in the long term to prevent this? Because we're a captive market. It's not like we can go anywhere else to get energy. And here we are sitting at their whim, suffering. The country is suffering. Do you not think as the CFTC you have a responsibility to review the monopoly that they hold going forward?
Well, my understanding on that issue is that until maybe a year or two ago, Eskom was a monopoly.
Yes,
but
technically it still is.
But recently, I think you'll be aware, a law was passed in Parliament allowing other players into the energy sector. As we're saying, I think we've read.
But Eskom is still the distributor, ultimately.
It is,
not?
But the generators, I mean, those companies that can generate electricity, I think that the actual generation, which is the problem.
Okay, I think maybe let me put it to you this way. When we have issues, we're not going to go to those independent, these ISPs that you're referring to. You're referring to ISPs. We're not going to go to them. We're either going to take Eskom to task or Ejenko. That's my point.
Well, again, it's how you see it. You were asking me about the environment. So yes. I was talking to you about the environment because I think you make reference to the monopolistic situation. What are we going to do?
It still feels that way.
What are we going to do with it? So I'm putting it to you that actually there may have been a monopolistic situation, but with the initiatives that you have mentioned, that may no longer be the case. But probably more generally, if your question is, what do you do with the monopolies or companies with the dominant market power? The Commission under the Act has powers to keep dominant institutions under regular monitoring and surveillance to ensure that they do not abuse their market power or they do not abuse their dominance. In the case of Eskom or any other dominant player, our concern would not be that you are in a dominant position. It is not an offense to be in a dominant position. It is not an offense to have market power. What is an offense is to abuse the market power. Absolutely.
So in this case, where you're abusing the power in the sense that you've completely, for whatever reason, failed to manage energy to the point where it's at crisis level, it's at crisis point, yet people obviously are still having to pay their electricity bills. To me, that constitutes an abuse because people are suffering, businesses are struggling, hospitals are struggling. So as consumers, where does your responsibility end to protect us from this kind of conduct?
Well, I know you have an assessment. I think my assessment would be a conduct would amount to an abusive conduct if there is a deliberate attempt. Now, the case we are referring to, there are questions about the capacity. Now, to what extent is the lack of capacity an abuse? That's the question you're asking, and you are
perhaps
making a point.
Could be.
You are making the point that yes, the lack of capacity is an abuse of consumers. Now,
I'll tell you why. Yes. I'll tell you why it is, because at the end of the day, these are problems which have always been there. It's not as though this is a new thing. We've always known about Malawi's potential to have very low capacity when it comes to energy generation. This didn't come as a surprise. Do institutions like Eskom not have an obligation to ensure that they are doing everything they can to preempt? The issue is preempting here and negligence.
We as
Very
a commission,
quickly, we have a few seconds.
We as a commission cannot speak for ESCOM. What we will tell you is that if an institution is in a monopoly, we regularly monitor to ensure they don't abuse their dominance. If an institution has economic power, we ensure that they don't abuse.
Lewis, do you not think people spending 25 hours in the dark and then only experiencing 5 hours of light the next day and then still having to pay high electricity bills is not an abuse of power?
If there was capacity and someone is deliberately denying them, the current situation, according to the reports we have seen, are that there are generational gaps.
But that's because somebody was incompetent, perhaps, and didn't foresee these gaps were going to happen.
Now, we haven't seen an economic analysis that points to that conclusion, and until we have seen it, we can only look at what is on the table.
All right. Okay. It sounds like you're limiting the powers that you have as CFTC to a certain extent, Lewis. But I'm going to leave it there.
No, we are working within the law. I know that you know everyone. People have very high expectations of the commission. They want the commission to do everything.
Right.
We can only do what the law provides.
Okay.
Yes.
All right.
Sure.
Let's leave it there. We have completely run out of time. Lewis Kulisewa, thank you so much for joining us today on Times Exclusive. However, I'm afraid that is all we have time for. Until next week, from me, Wezi Kasambala. Remember, we'll be back with yet another guest. Until then, bye-bye.